Over the past 2 weeks, we had some very special guest speakers, and so today we will do a review. They discussed with us the important concepts of self-observer and collective self-observer, as well as the idea that violence and authoritarianism are like a contagious disease. These are health concepts that bolster our theory of one mind. Many questions have come up during and after the talks, and therefore I would like to devote this time to delving into a deeper discussion. First, Dr. Bernard Beitman linked his work on synchronicity to our one mind framework, emphasizing that understanding human interconnectedness allows us to act on it. In other words, developing a personal self-observer means observing one's own mind objectively, evaluating what needs change, and activating shifts in behavior. And the collective self-observer is a societal parallel, or a personal self-observer writ large. There's also the meta-self-observer, which is a higher level awareness that monitors the functioning of the first self-observer and therefore can effectuate even greater change, and is also needed on a collective level to sustain a healthy shared consciousness. If humanity can become more empathic and telepathic, with a deepening mutual understanding, a collective mind can emerge. We need this to avert societal collapse. Humanity must cultivate personal and collective self-observers, overcome narcissism, and foster genuine understanding of one another to survive. Now, some have asked, how do we get there from our current fear-ridden state of fragmentation? I have what may be an unexpected answer. We need a frame. Having a self-observer means that we can also create our own boundaries. By first embarking on an inner journey, giving ourselves the space and time, we need to place ourselves in the eye of the hurricane, safely removed from the torrents of a disordered world and our own ego's state of fear, defensiveness, and attack. We can begin to recognize our inherent oneness with the universe and with one another. The initial fostering of a state of one mind needs this frame. It can be practiced through therapy, contemplation, meditation, or simply moments of silence. Oneness is our original state of health and wholeness. It is only after we begin making distinctions, distancing ourselves from one another, that we start to separate. An extreme state of separation or fragmentation, whether in the body, the mind, or the soul, is a state of disease. And this state always leads to destruction, debilitation, and even death. This, in my view, is how we have arrived at our current state of collective suicidality. On the other hand, we flourish to the degree that we resist, contain, and extinguish disease, allowing our natural state to emerge. This is where boundaries come into play. Establishing firm boundaries that differentiate health from disease, protecting health, while breaking down boundaries between self and others, we can restore ourselves to health. In therapy, boundaries and limit setting are essential to the proportion that a patient is ill. For a very sick person, for example, we try never to deviate from an established frame. Ultimately, boundaries will no longer be necessary, but we need to protect and nurture a state of health and wholeness first. Grounding ourselves firmly in it. Trust gradually replaces fear, and suspicion will give way to shared purpose. This is why the first step is to establish boundaries, so that we can eventually dissolve them. The following week, Dr. Gary Slutkin presented a more practical perspective and track record of tackling violence, including authoritarianism, as a contagious disease. This means epidemic control strategies can be applied to address it. violence meets the definition of disease. It has clear signs and symptoms, spreads from person to person, and causes more of itself. In fact, community violence, mass shootings, domestic abuse, war, and suicide can be seen as syndromes of the same basic underlying disease. Exposure to violence increases likelihood of perpetration, which means childhood exposure can lead to multiple forms of violence later. Right now, we observe a new and dangerous syndrome, authoritarian violence disorder. This operates like other epidemics, but is more contagious and more lethal because it can engulf entire countries and spread internationally. It resembles past 20th century mass atrocities and functions like a relapse in a different geography. There are multiple index cases or initial spreaders, not only at leadership levels, but throughout society, with violence manifesting in local events such as raids. In other words, violence is not primarily a political or personal phenomenon, but a public health one. Viewing it as an epidemic is actually good news because proven methods exist. You first understand the disease, locate where it is spreading, and interrupt transmission. As with COVID-19, exposure is not enough. Certain individuals are more vulnerable because of psychological pain, predispositions toward obedience, or enhanced receptivity via dehumanization. Some have asked, how can we confront those who attack viciously with overwhelming force if we discount that there are bad people, especially in high government positions? Is it sufficient to go high when they go low? Here I will speak for myself, since I have been perhaps primary among those who have pointed to a single figure as the greatest danger to our collective survival, Donald Trump. Yet, at the same time, I never addressed him as a person. Few people understand that I never treated him as an individual, never diagnosed him, and never considered him as I would a personal patient. Nor were my commentaries ad hominem attacks. From the very beginning, I was concerned about the public health crisis he posed, how he was a danger to society, and how, the longer he stayed in an influential position, the more widely he would spread a mental health epidemic, which is a public health issue. We are speaking of a different level here. That is why I have emphasized prevention, early intervention, and aggressive interruption. This is very similar to the boundary setting I mentioned earlier, except in this case it is not solely for the inner person's protection and growth, but for the outer improvement and healing of society. The principle is the same. Identify where harm is originating, create a structure to contain the spread, and then address it with firmness and persistence. At a societal level, these boundaries take the form of laws, policies, community interventions, and even sometimes coordinated containment of a high-powered individual. Frames that protect the collective mind while it regains its health. At the societal level, these boundaries take the form of laws, policies, community interventions, and sometimes coordinated public health measures with a high-positioned official. Frames that protect the collective mind while it regains its health. This is not just going high in the moral sense when others go low. It is going very high, ascending to the meta self-observer level that can see the system at macro scale and integrate all the knowledge, science, and intervention strategies at our disposal to apply them proportionately to the severity of the situation. The goal is effectiveness in healing, including the so-called index cases or the initial bearers of disease.